Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Alex Hall, who's professor at the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences and director of the UCLA Center for Climate Science. His research is aimed at predicting and understanding climate change impacts at scales relevant to decision makers, especially in the state of California. Alex and his team are currently studying the future of wildfire in California and are working with water management agencies in Southern California to ensure sustainability of water resources under climate change. Alex was the lead author in the IPCC's Fifth Assessment Reports chapter on regional climate change and a contributing author to its chapter on climate model evaluation. Dr. Hall, thank you for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to everyone here for all that you're doing for climate and sustainability. I'm going to go ahead and just dive in and share my screen. Everyone seeing that okay? All right, great. Thank you for the introduction as well. I am going to be speaking to you today about work that we've been doing over the past maybe up to a decade now about trying to understand how climate change would affect California's water resources. And this is, of course, intimately connected to the material that was in the documentary that you all have seen already, or hopefully have seen. We have been working on this issue for quite a while, and we've been looking at the implications of climate change for elements of the physical climate, things like precipitation, snowpack, and stream flow. And we've especially been looking in the Sierra Nevada, which supplies about 60% of California's water. We have relied on analyses of output from global climate models, which, as many of you know, are our best tools for understanding global climate change. And we also, at UCLA, have been running high-resolution regional climate models focused on the state of California. And so I'm going to be showing some results from these studies today, kind of some highlights. All these results pertain to the end of the 21st century, and they assume a so-called business as usual scenario of greenhouse gas emissions, where we keep increasing greenhouse gas emissions at the same rate that we have been over the past couple of decades globally. And I know many of you may be interested in the same information I'm about to present, but for different time periods. So for example, if you're interested in the middle of the 21st century, which it might be a more policy relevant time period under business as usual, or if you're interested in how these results would play out under a lower emission scenario, like the one that is envisaged in the Paris Climate Agreement, a very simple rule of thumb is going to be just to cut the numbers I'm about to show in half. So that's a little wind up here. And I'm just going to start out by telling you some of the lessons that we learned. First of all, not surprisingly, you warm the climate, you lose snow. And our biggest storm events are likely to get bigger, so more precipitation. The combination of the loss of snow and the increase in the precipitation leads to a dramatic increase in stream flow and flooding. And finally, our dry years, or drought years, are likely to become drier. And many of these signals actually have already emerged in our local climate record. What I'm going to be talking about are the large changes that we anticipate by the end of the century, but keep in mind, a lot of these changes are already here. All right, so first of all, the loss of snow. So this is a map of California's Sierra Nevada. It's kind of, you have to kind of tilt your head to get a typical north-south orientation. Just to put the Sierra Nevada on the slide here, I tilted it on the side. So you can see in the lower left, the Bay Area. And then you can see Lake Tahoe. Can you guys see my cursor, by the way? Does that show up? Okay. So here's Lake Tahoe, the elbow in the border that separates California and Nevada. And then we have Sequoia Kings Canyon in the south part of Sierra Nevada. Yosemite right here in the middle, and Owens Lake on the right-hand side. And this is just showing the percent loss of snow by the end of the century under, again, this business as usual scenario. And you can see that at the lower elevations especially, there's a near total loss of snowpack. The middle elevations have a loss somewhere around 50%. And it's really only at the highest elevations, for example, where you find Mount Whitney, that you see the snow cover preserved. And this is a snapshot on April 1st, which is the moment when water resource managers measure snow to understand what's available for the upcoming dry season. So this loss of snow is really quite dramatic. And it is associated with a change in the timing of runoff. So if you look at all the streams in the Sierra Nevada and you add up all the runoff, you can just compute how much occurs in each month of the calendar year. And these gray circles show those calculations for the historical climate, which is 1981 to 2000, roughly the last couple of decades of the 20th century. And what you see is a runoff sequence that reflects the existence of a robust snowpack. So even though we get a lot of precipitation in December, January, February, the heart of our wet season, there's not too much runoff, and that's because it's being accumulated as snow. And then when the seasonal warming occurs in March, April, and May, the snow starts to run off, and we have a large pulse of runoff, typically in May, which extends into June, July, and August. So we have this regular and predictable runoff into our streams. It's captured by reservoirs primarily. That is occurring in the summertime when water is most needed for both agriculture and urban uses. And if you look at the end of the century, because of this loss of snow, there's a shift to much earlier in the season of when the runoff would occur, on average about 2 months earlier. And you can see that the peak of the runoff is in January and February, right when the precipitation maximum occurs. And that's an indicator that the precipitation is falling as rain and not snow and running off very quickly. And by the way, if you look at the actual runoff time series from year to year in our simulations, you see a much flashier runoff in the future because the water is not being accumulated as snow and then melting off gradually. It's simply running into streams as the precipitation is falling. So that's another change in the character that's not quite captured by this graphic. But anyway, dramatic changes in the timing of runoff and the character of runoff due simply to the loss of snow. It turns out that warming has another implication. It increases the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. In my climate science community, we like to say that warmer air can hold more water vapor. And that means that during atmospheric river events, more water is wrung out of the atmosphere as moist air ascends over the Sierra Nevada. And that means that when we have a big atmospheric river event, precipitation increases. And we have been working to simulate these events in the future. And we find that under projected warming conditions, precipitation during the most extreme atmospheric river events goes up about 25%. But remember, a much smaller fraction of that precipitation is coming as snow. Most of it's now coming as rain in this warmer climate. And that yields an even bigger increase in runoff when we have big atmospheric river events. And it turns out that the changes in snow and runoff are highly elevation dependent. So here is just a graphic showing the various elevation classes in the Sierra Nevada. One low elevation class and a couple of mid elevation classes, and one at the highest elevations, again, kind of like these Mount Whitney landscapes, these subalpine landscapes. And the left set of figures shows the change in snow during a large atmospheric river event. And you can see that at all these elevations, there's a loss of snow, with the greatest losses occurring in the middle elevations. But look at these changes in surface runoff. These little dots, show the baseline climate in gray, and then the blue is the extra runoff that occurs during an atmospheric river event. And you can see this very dramatic increase in runoff. So if you look in mid elevations, you see increases in runoff anywhere between 82 to almost 300%. So big increases in the pulsing that's coming from our streams when there is a big atmospheric river event. So again, this really poses big challenges for water resource management. So just to summarize, on average over the Sierra Nevada, we have a 25% increase during an extreme atmospheric river event. We have temperature increases on the order of 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and that results in a loss of snow accumulation, and a disproportionate increase in runoff, much larger than what you expect from the precipitation increase, simply because more of the precipitation is coming as snow, or as rain rather than as snow. So that is another important feature of climate change to keep in mind. Also, the total precipitation during a particular water year is generally determined by a very small number of large atmospheric river events. And that means that the increase in precipitation during these extreme atmospheric river events means that wet years will generally occur more frequently. And so if we look at a wet year like our 2016-2017 water year, if we look at the precipitation that fell during that November to March period, the heart of the wet season, we can put that in the context of the historical record, and we can determine that an event like this took place 4 times roughly in the past 100 years, or a year like this did anyway. And that means that roughly 1 out of every 25 years is this extreme. So we expect an event like this, based on the historical record, to occur once every 25 years. And then we ask ourselves, well, if we go into global climate models and we ask ourselves, well, how frequently do these types of events occur in the future, given that these big atmospheric river events get bigger? We anticipate them occurring roughly 2.5 times as frequently in both the northern and the southern parts of the state. So this is significant implications for our water resource infrastructure and its ability to handle large flows. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe more relevant for the conditions that we're experiencing now, we also see an increase in the frequency of extremely dry years. So if we imagine, if we look at the 2013-2014 water year, this was an unusually dry year. In fact, it only occurred once in the historical record. So a very, very rare event, or rare year, I should say. And of course, this, the impact of a lack of precipitation obviously is water scarcity. And if we also examined how frequently this type of event changes in the future, again, in our global climate models. And the event becomes almost twice as frequent in Northern California and a little bit more than twice as frequent in Southern California. And so we expect also drought to become more frequent going forward. So our 4 lessons, again, we lose snow, our big atmospheric river events get bigger, flooding increases dramatically, and dry years get drier. And we're very confident about some of these changes. For example, the loss of snow is a very straightforward consequence of warming. And the warming is an element of climate change that we're extremely confident in. In fact, it's a near certainty that we'll have more warming in the future due to continued increases in greenhouse gases. And in addition, because warmer air very straightforwardly leads to more water vapor in the atmosphere, we're quite confident that flooding also increases dramatically. These other pieces are less well understood. These are more tentative conclusions. The idea that big atmospheric river events get bigger and dry years get drier. These are things that we have some confidence in, but we're not quite as confident in as the other changes. So it's important to keep in mind that there are uncertainties attached to these conclusions and degrees of confidence. So some implications. Well, one, I think implication is related to water storage. To maintain the same water resources, the loss of our natural reservoir, the snowpack, must be compensated for by an increase in other forms of storage. And in addition, the increase in swings between wet and dry years implies that more water must be stored during wet years to get through the deeper dry spells. So we are going to need some way of storing water to compensate for the snowpack and to get us through these dry years and to capture the water when it comes in these big wet years. And I think groundwater is an obvious solution here and one that is much more consistent with sustainability than building reservoirs, but that's something to think about. Flood control is another implication. The increase in runoff during extreme precipitation implies a major flood control challenge and a rethinking of the rules and regulations associated with existing water resource infrastructure. The storage increases could help here, but capture is, of course, a challenge. And finally, I feel like even though this is a water resource-oriented discussion, it would be irresponsible of me not to mention the implications of all this for wildfire. When you increase precipitation during wet years, that builds up fuels. And then when you decrease precipitation during dry years, that dries them out. And this increasing swings between wet and dry could cause the increase in fuels and the increased drying of fuels. And in addition, we know that warmer temperatures favor more ignition events and larger and more intense wildfires when they occur. So this is very linked also to the wildfire issue, and which is another existential challenge for California. So let's see, how am I doing on time here? I'll just quickly mention that we're in the midst of producing a very large amount of data for the next California climate assessment, the fifth assessment, which is coming up in the next year or two. We're working with our partners at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is down where many of you, I think, are probably located. And we are doing high resolution regional modeling again for California. And our goal is to address some new scientific questions that are only possible through advances in climate science, and especially the techniques that we use to produce high resolution information. So things like how much more frequent will multi-year drought become? How would it play out across the state? What is the likelihood of a drought so deep that urban areas run out of water? How will flooding risk change on a watershed by watershed basis? What is the likelihood of an event like this very, very dramatic 1861, 1862 water year, where we had probably something like 40 to 60 inches of rainfall in a single season? How would flooding during such an event play out during a warmer world with reduced snow? How will warmer temperatures affect evapotranspiration and ultimately stream flow? I think one reason why we had so little stream flow in the current drought is because not only because the precipitation was low, but because warmer temperatures are causing more evaporative losses. And this is, I think, another big question for water resources. And then we have the fire risk questions, which I won't get into right now. But that just gives you a taste of the things that we're thinking about as we try to peer into the future and understand what the increases in greenhouse gases, if they continue, mean for California. So with that, I'll wrap up.
Joe, you're muted.
I could have gone on.
Oh, sorry. You did good. Thanks, Dr. Hall. We'll be back with the Q&A period here in a few minutes.
Okay.
Like now to introduce Tiffany Boyd-Hodgson. Tiffany serves on the Vallecitos Water District representing Division 5, that is San Elijo Hills, Discovery, and Lake San Marcos, in San Marcos and parts of Escondido. She's a mother to 4 children and a scientist. She became interested in water quality while living in Pennsylvania near the Horsham Naval Base, where thousands of neighbors' wells were contaminated by and PFOA, the forever chemicals, after decades of fire retardant runoff entering the groundwater supply. She chairs the Personnel, Public Awareness and Policy Committee and serves on the Finance Committee. Additionally, she's a Vallecitos Water District representative to the City of San Marcos General Plan Advisory Committee. Tiffany, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you tonight and to be among these distinguished guests and panelists. What I bring to the table is that I'm a politician. I'm an elected official. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I'd like to start with a story. As part of my duties on the Vallecitos Water District Board of Directors, I attend regional conferences and meetings, and I was in the Association of California Water Agencies meeting the other day, and they were giving a webinar on the Russian River watershed, and they had a panelist, much like this one, and there was a man named Tom Schoeneman on that panel, and he is a volunteer president of the Redwood Valley District Board of Directors. And he's the president of the board, and he described his water district as a failing district, which is unusual for someone who's on the board and in charge of the board to describe it as a failing district. But he called it a failing district. It's a small-ish district. They have about 1,200 domestic users, 190 agricultural users. And if you saw the movie, you know that those agriculture customers use a lot more water than the domestic users. He said something astonishing. He said, since 1989, we have had no secure source of water. We have no water. We can no longer hook up new residencies.
15 hours.
We have no new folks that are able to hook up. And it looks like they take water from Lake Mendocino as well. And that is running low. They can supply only 55 gallons per house per day up in the Redwood Valley District, where it's a failing district. They've had to increase their water rates by 30%, and they can't provide water. So think about that. I live in Southern California. That's where the Vallecitos Water District is. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to serve on the water board, because my ask of you is to either run for office yourself or find somebody to run for office. Because we need people that serve on water districts that they care about water. And I will tell you a little bit about what it's like to serve on the Vallecitos Water District. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Can you see that? Thumbs up? Okay, good. All right, let me see if I can. Okay, so I serve on the Vallecitos Water District. I represent Division 5. It is, excuse me, it's a district of about 12,000, 13,000 voters. And I was just elected in November. I'd like to start by doing a land acknowledgement. I usually do these, so I'm going to read this land acknowledgement very quickly just to let you know where I'm coming from. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory and homelands of the Luiseno Payam-Cowishan people. Cal State University San Marcos and the surrounding areas are still home to the 6 federally recognized bands of the La Jolla, Pala, Palma, Pachanga, Rincon, Saboba, Luiseno Payam-Cowishan people. It is also important to acknowledge that this land remains the shared space among the Kapanga-Wisham, Kupeño, Kumeyaay, and Ipe peoples. We acknowledge that we are guests on traditional unceded Luiseno Payam-Cowishan land. So I'm coming to you from Southern California, northern San Diego County, unceded Luiseno Payam-Cowishan land. You know, in watching the movie, something that struck me, and a lot of things struck me, and I hope we'll talk about them a little bit later, but there was a quote that stood out, given, you know, where I am in the water industry and the water sector. The politics will determine the future of the water in California. And I believe that. And because I believe that, I'm terrified, frankly. The politics will determine the future of the water in California. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I ran for water board and what it's like to serve. So I ran on a platform of providing affordable, quality, reliable water for my constituents. The person that I was running against had been on the water district for many years. He was a 2-term incumbent. He had 28 years of experience in San Marcos, political experience. He served on the city council prior to that. and took $40,000 from developers to get himself on the water board. And that seemed wrong to me. I'm a scientist, so my platform was science, not special interests when I'm making decisions. And as you can tell from the election results, I did win. It was not an easy race, but I ran because I care about water and I care about the planet. And I thought it was wrong that our water district was making decisions with so much developer money in their back pockets. To orient you a little bit, Southern California, this is all of the water districts in San Diego County. Some of them are special districts like mine, Vallecitos Water District. Others are affiliated with municipalities like the city of Escondido, Carlsbad Municipal Water District. But there are 23 districts and Vallecitos is number 20, which is right here in blue. Vallecitos has about 100,000 people in the area. We do sewer and water. So 21,000 water meters, 20,000 sewer customers. The budget's about $91 million, and they've got about 108 employees. So it's a moderate-sized water district, and it is a special district. And they deliver 15,384 acre feet of water per year. And if you're not familiar with what an acre foot is, if you can imagine a football field filled 1 foot tall, that's an acre foot. So that's a lot of water. In my division, there are 5 folks on the board, and we each have a territory. It's, some divisions have their elected sort of at large, but we have districts, and mine is Division 5 right down here. And if you live in Southern California, if you happen to live near me, Division 2 and Division 3 are up in 2022 for elections. So if that interests you, please reach out to me. I'll put my information in the chat. But the divisions made by my water district, they have a regional impact, and we get to make policy around development. We get to approve infrastructure projects, but we also have the opportunity to be visionary. And that's also something that attracted to me about serving on a water district, because in San Diego County alone, there are going to be 1,000 vacant jobs over the next 5 years, 1,000. And we don't have a lot of people ready to fill those jobs. So one of the things that I am doing as I sit on the water district that's tangential to water is I'm partnering with Palomar College, which is a local community college. I'm partnering with our local high schools and our local middle schools to try to encourage kiddos to get excited about water and want to work in water, because we're going to run out of people if we don't do that. So that's another way that you can affect change. People that are passionate about water, they want to see the water secure and reliable and safe. And if you don't have people sitting on water boards that do those kinds of things, then you have a glut of people retiring and you don't have people to backfill those positions. And then what that means is that you don't have people with all of the experience keeping our water safe and reliable. And that's where inexperience can happen, inadvertent mistakes can happen, accidents can happen. And we, one of our neighbors in a little bit south of us, Poway, just last year, they had an accident and they couldn't drink their water for a week and a half. And it's it's a fairly urbanized area. And it was just something that could have been avoided, but they were without water for a week and a half. So it's important to have folks with experience. The way that my water district is structured, and if you, as I've talked to people in the community, not a lot of people, first of all, know that water districts can be governed by a board of directors. Number 2, they don't know that often those people are elected. And number 3, they don't know how those people fit into the equation. So it looks like this. You and me, we're the ratepayers. The board of directors are the ones that are elected in Vallecitos. Again, it varies. Ours is a special district, but there are municipalities where, for example, the city council would be, would have input into how the water is managed. So that's also something that you could look into and be aware of, so that you can realize when you're voting for city council, you're also voting for the people that govern your water. So the board of directors is over all of the operations, the general manager, which is typically the highest officer in the district, and the ratepayers are truly the boss. That's the way that I look at it. I serve the people in my district. So something that was very, very powerful at the end of the movie, and I took a screenshot, it's kind of fuzzy, but this is a screenshot of the last image of the movie. And it said, learn where your water comes from, be part of a sustainable water future. So I'm going to drill down just briefly and tell you, if you live in Southern California, in San Diego County, where your water comes from, because not a lot of people know that. So down where I am in Vallecitos, we have, we do get our water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and the Colorado River, just like was discussed in the movie. From there, it goes to the Metropolitan Water District. And you remember from the movie, Metropolitan Water District was a subject of the film. And I hope we can talk about that a little bit later. We get about 55% of our water from the Metropolitan Water Authority that sells it to all of the member agencies, including Vallecitos. The Livenhain Municipal Water District is also a member agency, and we import about another 18% from Livenhain. But Livenhain also gets their water from Metropolitan Water District. So in truth, we get 3/4 of our water from Metropolitan Water District. We also get about 27% of our water from the Carlsbad desalination plant. And desalination is a separate discussion, but we do have another source of water. This is not nearly as diverse as I would like to see it, but we do have 2 sources of water in Vallecitos. Like I mentioned, we do water and wastewater. So what I've shown you in green is water in. Over here, what is blue is water out. So part of it goes to the Encino Wastewater Authority, and part of it goes to a facility called the Middle Arc Reclamation Facility, and they recycle about 74% of that, of the wastewater. That's where your water comes from if you live in Southern California. As mentioned in the movie, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta provides a lot of it. The Colorado River, we also get some of it. And I think this is my last slide, just sort of my last push, my big ask. I know about running for office, and I know what it's like to serve on a water district. And these down ballot races, such as water district, are very important. This is how you can affect change, but it's also a place where if we start filling these positions with folks that care about water, they care about the environment, they care about everybody having water, not just, I've got mine, I don't care about you. If we have people that are interested in water equity serving on these water districts, then eventually places like Metropolitan Water Authority, places like San Diego County Water Authority are also going to have those people in office as well. And that's how we need to make change. That's one way that we can make change. That's the way that I know, that's the way I'm advocating. And it's not mutually exclusive to anything else that we're going to talk about today, but it's another avenue that a lot of people don't think about. So I'm encouraging you to think about that. And if you are in Southern California and you are interested, if you live near San Marcos, this is sort of the heart of San Marcos. This is Cal State University, San Marcos right here. This is up towards Vista. This is over here towards Escondido. If you live in those areas and you think it might be fun to run for water district, I encourage you to contact me. I can help you. I think that's it. Thank you.
Great.
Well, thank you so much. Very enlightening. Our next speaker is Felicia Marcus. Felicia is an attorney and consultant with 35 years experience in organizational management, policy development, program implementation, and public engagement at the federal, state, and local level. She's currently the William C. Landreth Visiting Fellow at Stanford University's Water in the West program. Most recently, she was chair of the California State Water Board with regulatory responsibility for water conservation, groundwater management, wastewater recycling, stormwater capture and desalination, water rights laws, and the state's drinking water program. Felicia helped lead the board through the state's worst drought in modern history. Prior to this, Felicia led the US EPA's Southwest and Pacific region, working extensively on air, water, and toxic issues, while helping negotiate agreements, develop policy, and implement projects on state, tribal, and US-Mexico border and Pacific Islands issues. She's also headed the LA Department of Public Works, which under her leadership gained national awards for environmental initiatives and performance. She's also held leadership positions at the National nonprofit organizations and has been practicing attorney in private and nonprofit sectors. She currently serves on the commission of the Environmental Cooperation Joint Public Advisory Council, US, Mexico, and Canada, and was recently elected a fellow in the US National Academy of Public Administration. Felicia has a law degree from NYU, an AB cum laude from Harvard in East Asian Studies, and studied on a fellowship at Hong Kong University. Felicia, with a background like that, wow. Please go ahead.
I'm afraid it sometimes feels like I can't hold a job when I look at it, but it's been a pretty bizarre voyage and one that it chose me. I haven't chosen it. So I feel sometimes like I'm the Forrest Gump of the environmental world. I just keep showing up in different places, but I'm thrilled to be here tonight with you as I come out of community engagement originally in Los Angeles and organizing. And I think people coming together to learn jointly together, to act together, to care about their community is what really makes the world run. And we need more of it. In addition to needing more people to run for office of all kinds, but particularly on these water agencies. Whatever your opinion, I do think it's the ultimate in democracy. And I'm just happy to be here, and thank you for having me. It was sort of fun to watch River's End again. And I'm not going to talk as much about what's in the film, but I'm happy to talk about any of the issues in the film in the Q&A if folks are interested. I particularly appreciated Meryl asking me to talk about the solutions that are out there in some way, because I've spent the last 2 years since leaving the water boards focusing on the things that give me hope rather than the things that break my heart. And there's plenty of both out there in California water. And you saw a lot of the ones that break my heart in that film. So I'm happy to be able to talk about some of the more optimistic things out there. But I am going to give you a little bit of a sense, in addition to the really good looks that Alex and Tiffany have given you of the overall water system. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to go fast. And I'm going to go fast because there's not a quiz at the end. I'm just going to go fast to give you sort of a menu of things that we could talk about in the Q&A, and that I'm happy to follow up with anybody about afterwards. So let me move to a quick romp through my slides that I hope will just give you food for thought, if nothing else, for today and later. And I always frame it in as a question as to whether we can rise to the resilience challenge. And I'm focusing a bit on San Diego, although I'm amazed at the breadth of folks who have tuned in today. And I'm happy to talk about issues in other places too, if it seems appropriate. But I just want to give you a feel, because I think part of our challenge in California water, and some of the folks in the film mentioned it, are that people just don't know it. It's no fault of the people. It's that it's hard to learn. It's bits and pieces of an incredibly fragmented system, incredibly fragmented, more so than any other place I know in the country. And that is the part of our problem. There are some things we do that we do better than anywhere else in the country, and in fact, anywhere else in the world. And there are a lot of things that make us, in some ways, the laughing stock or the puzzle of the rest of the country. I don't think the rest of the world, because I don't think they realize it. I'm going to start with this, and don't be afraid of all the words here. My husband hates that I put all of this on a slide. I'll just tell you what this is. This is the wallet card that I prepared early on in my tenure at the Water Board, because I realized that people were talking, there were talking points, people were emphatic about certain issues in California water, and they were all wrong. They were all seeing a piece of the puzzle they knew, and just repeating it louder and slower across the decades at each other, because I've been in and out of the California water world, having negotiated the Bay Delta Accords, which you may have heard about in the 90s when I was at EPA. I fled the water world for about 7 years. And I went into land conservation, where people knew how to make a deal, knew how to work with unlikely allies, learned how to work on fixing something in their communities for the betterment of their community. It was very therapeutic. But I got drawn back in to the water world because folks needed their social worker, I guess. And I realized that folks were very emphatically talking past each other. And it reminded me of the parable of the blind man and the elephant, where each one is touching a different part of this creature and describing it. And there's no way this could be the same creature. And I just couldn't shake it. So I did the elephant wallet card to arm people, at worst for cocktail party chatter. And these are the key things. And Alex talked a bit about some of this. We have the most variable hydrology in the country, frankly, by far. When it rains, it rains. When it doesn't fall where most of it's used, doesn't fall in the time of year that it's used. Therefore, we need storage and conveyance and infrastructure. And we've built that out probably almost beyond where the system can bear. And I'll show you a little bit of why that is. But modern California would not be possible without not just the State Water Project or the Federal Water Project or the Colorado Aqueduct, but myriad conveyances and storages above and below ground to deal with this variation. Every area has a totally different mix of sources. Some have groundwater, some don't. San Diego area doesn't have a groundwater basin to speak of the size they have in Orange County and the San Gabriel Valley in LA, and that makes different choices necessary. People have a different mix of water rights, and we can talk about water rights. It makes a very big difference, particularly in agriculture, which is a very harsh system. This is something that always gets missed. It's 100%. A junior gives up 100% of their water to the next senior. So while there are some people that thrive, even within the deepest droughts in agriculture, there are hundreds of thousands of acres that just go out of production, either because they have junior water rights, they're not over a well-stocked groundwater basin, or sometimes they've sold their water to somebody else. So appearances can be deceiving. So the impact of a drought varies greatly, but also the mix of solutions vary greatly. So for example, San Diego County has invested in that desal facility, which is great for Vallecitos. And it is important, the most expensive water out there, but it's important in a community that doesn't have a groundwater basin to put a high volume of recycled water or stormwater in it, which is why in other parts of the state, folks do that first, because it's cheaper and it's closer and it has fewer environmental impacts. But a little slice of San Diego County of very expensive water just helps folks sleep at night because of that diversification. The answers, though, are a mix of conservation, recycling, stormwater capture, and desal, yes, in the appropriate circumstances, and integrating our water management to get what's called more pop for drop, and a lot of storage. The below ground storage is perhaps the most important if you can get it, particularly in the Central Valley, because that is the only thing big enough to compensate for the loss of snowpack. You could never do enough on-stream or even off-stream surface storage to compare to the size of our groundwater basins. And then some basics that I won't go through that are important to California. But climate change, for all the reasons Alex says, is a game changer. So is population growth, but climate change is the big one. Here's just another way of looking at things. People always forget the Colorado River. Actually, San Diego gets their water, their imported water via Met, but they also get water transferred through Met from the Colorado. So more dependent on Colorado sources, although being a part of metropolitan allows for the balancing with Delta water when you have it. And there's stories about investment there that I can talk about if you'd like. Here's the system that I was talking about, without which modern California would not be possible. Again, as Hal Candice said in the film, and others said, it was built before our modern sensibilities about the environment. And it's just grew and grew and grew without that awareness. And we've pretty much destroyed the ecosystem that is really our common heritage. And salmon are the most iconic of those species, though not the only ones. The ecosystem is on the brink of collapse in the Bay Delta, which is almost unimaginable. But so now our challenge is to do that course correction, and that's where you get the water wars. Here's just a picture that represents what Alex was talking about. This I had taped up in the bathroom mirror during the drought. This was just a taste of things to come, and it was pretty awful, as you'll recall. In the Brown administration, I won't go through all this, we did a water action plan before the drought to deal with climate change. That's what we were thinking 30 years in the future, and 30 years in the future to do all the things we need to do for resilience in California, which are all doable if we do them. We're going to take years and years, with conservation being at the top of the list, regional self-reliance through all of the things I talked about in terms of recycling, stormwater capture, desal, dealing with the Delta, protecting and restoring ecosystems ahead of the curve, expanding groundwater management, which is why we got a historic groundwater management passed finally in the depths of the drought that took 100 years to do after our surface water system, but also figuring out how to get safe drinking water to the communities that lack it, even in this decade. That's a huge, probably the most important thing any of us can do. Dealing with flood protection, because as Alex said, those floods are going to be a doozy and they cause death and destruction and mayhem. Drought is kind of slow moving. You have a little chance to deal with it. Floods, not so much. And then a number of other things. Governor Newsom picked up the baton and did an updated version of this. They were going to do a bond, but were waylaid by the pandemic. Now there's money in the budget to do some of this, but I'm hoping we'll catch up. But then we had the drought. The wake-up call, the Godzilla of all wake-up calls. And if you lived in Sacramento, you saw your reservoir at Folsom. This is the chart we saw, which was the worst in 500 years or more of snowpack, if you like charts. The next year, then we had a lot more. So, you know, we're going to get floods too, and almost lost Oroville. And there's another picture of that, if you like pictures better than graphs. But again, these are the realities we have to deal with. Sea level rise will have that impact on the delta that will swamp almost anything we might do. There's a whole story there we can talk about. The delta issues that were profiled in the paper are the heartbreaking ones. It is really challenging. Can we figure out how to share these rivers between the ecosystem and water users and not forget about the fishermen and not forget about the ecosystem generally? This is one that we've struggled with. We were able to make some headway, but it's very much stalled. I'm happy to talk about it if you'd like, but our ecosystems are plummeting in a way that if people realize, they would be horrified and shocked that we haven't been able to rise to the occasion. Some people like to vilify agriculture. It's a competing social good. We grow amazing amounts of food and fiber, yes, for us and the rest of the world, but we're one of only 5 areas in the world that can grow the level of healthy fruits and vegetables that we can grow. It just may be too much of a good thing because we've outstripped nature's ability, our groundwater basin's ability, nature to provide or for our ecosystems to survive. And we're overdrafting those groundwater basins to the tune of 2 million acre feet a year. So too much of a good thing. As a result, we have infrastructure collapsing, a loss of that storage space, and a host of other problems that are now being hopefully remedied under SGMA, and then the wildfire issue that that Alex talked about. We can talk about that a bit because I think protecting our healthy headwaters will do both climate and water good in the long run, and that's one of the issues I've been spending a lot of time on this last year. But the reality is we can do a lot about it. We're incredibly wasteful with how we use water. We use it once, throw it away, goes in the ocean, which really doesn't need any of it. Integrated water management from the top of the watershed on down, more pop per drop, can be more efficient in so many ways. And particularly in urban California, there's just a lot we can do. And there is in agriculture as well. But in urban California, I'm not worried if we invest the money and we can just look at what Israel's done. We can look what Australia's done. We don't have to do as much as either of them have done, and we can make a difference. During the drought, we did the mandatory conservation regs where the San Diego area did really well. San Diego is actually one of the most efficient cities. I know it varies by the communities within your region. Some use many times more water. I think San Diego was in the 40s, even down into the 30s at a certain point, gallons per capita per day, including outdoors. There are other districts in your area and up north that use 600 gallons per person per day. And a lot of that's on outdoor irrigation, ornamental landscape. We had campaigns like the Lawn Dude campaign and fixing leaks. Really, we use over 50% outdoors. A lot of that is lawns, trying to make a green carpet in front of our houses that's green as a Scottish golf link during the depths of the summer or even a drought. That's not necessary for modern living. And folks really showed they could do that during the drought, making it 24%. And largely it was through not watering lawns as much or turning them out when they could afford to or got a subsidy. Leaks are the other big portfolio there. Urban areas can lose 10, 20, and 30, 60% in rural areas of their water to leaks. You button that up, you get a lot of water. And that's water you've treated to a very high state using energy and money to treat. So we need to save that water. In the San Diego area, I put this one because I love this Leonardo quote, water is the driver of nature. But in San Diego, you have one of the leading demonstration projects for recycling, where this project, if you haven't been to it, I recommend you go to the tour, has been treating 1 million gallons a day to prove they can do it 24/7 to get to direct potable reuse someday. which is sort of the holy grail for some agencies, actually need to go. I think one of the big untold stories of the drought was the focus on a paradigm shift in recycled water. And in San Diego, the focus is on getting to reservoir augmentation and eventually to direct potable. Why? There's not a groundwater basin to put recycled water in, and Point Loma doesn't have any space to even build out full secondary treatment. So it's kind of a win-win, and they've been showing what they can do, and they have an ambitious program, again, for reservoir augmentation, where you've got some buffers. We put out over $1.5 million to try and help take projects from the drawing board into the ground in grants and loans. And we, oh, good, I need to wrap. And we did rules, even going out to indirect potable and the reservoir augmentation that the city of San Diego worked on. We did rules for desal so it could deal with its externalities in the marine environment and be on a level playing field. We did the preliminary work on direct potable standards, and those will be out in 2023 and more, to give people something to aim at. And what that's done, it's helped San Diego, but it's also helped the LA area to have two of what will be the biggest projects in the world, in addition to Orange County's longstanding program, where the city of LA will recycle 100% of its wastewater to the tune of 170 million gallons a day. I could do that acre feet. That's more like 190,000 acre feet. And if you look at Metropolitan, it used to be just the imported water people. They're doing 150 million gallon a day recycled water facility to help with resilience down there, as opposed to just being the imported water people. So there's a lot going on, and there's more we can talk about. Just to make a point that data and technology change the game and make things easier, both in terms of the kind of work Alex does, in the terms of being able to do this advanced treatment and have sensors in real time to feel that it's safe, all kinds of telemetry, leak detection, you name it, opens all sorts of worlds. And in agriculture, it really opens the world to far more efficient irrigation and also chemical and fertilizer application. There are big things happening in those upper headwaters that I mentioned and Alex mentioned, both for water and carbon. They're setting back the floodplains. In that flood year where Oroville almost went, there's no way Sacramento wouldn't have flooded out without having set aside the YOLO bypass, where all of a sudden you're setting aside areas where the rivers can spread out. It also ends up being good for fish and wildlife. So a lot of work on that we can do. But what's the biggest challenge? It's not the ecosystem management itself or law or technical or engineering financial. It's what I like to call the challenge of ecosystem management, and it's us. It's how we talk past each other. It's the fragmentation. It's how we devolve to the water wars. It's even the fight between San Diego and Met, which is an enormous waste of time and money. I'm hoping the new general manager, Adel Hajkhalil, who I've known for years and who is the nicest man in the world, will help to bring unity to that fractious body, because we don't have time for fights. We need to all get together and solve our collective problem, because we have a freight train of pain coming at us under climate change that should unite us. Biggest failure, as you know from the film, our ecosystem. We have failed the fish big time. I wish they could speak. And then San Diego, here's your bottom line. You are at the end of a lot of pipes, and you are mighty, but you are junior. That means you are at risk. And that means you do need to diversify and spend more money. The water's going to get tighter because of the snowpack loss. We can't capture all of that comes in a flood. We capture more of it and get it into groundwater places, and Metropolitan and others are doing a lot of that, not just going for a tunnel, but we're not going to be able to get at scale. So efficiency is going to have to be the name of the game. You're really efficient already. Lawns and leak, you could do more. You're on the cutting edge of recycling and on the edge in desal too, but it's costly. And I want to say in closing, the natural world in California and beyond is yours too. So you should be speaking up to save it in a way that most folks in urban areas don't realize, whether you're in San Diego taking it from the Sierra, if you're in San Francisco taking it from the Sierras, the Bay Area is even more dependent on imported water than Southern California. They just don't realize it a lot of the time. I spend a lot of time telling them these days. And investing in these things, which is going to cost more, is definitely going to be worth it. So the key is to march toward the future, not the folly of thinking you can get back a past that is already being overtaken by events. So with that, thanks. Sorry, I went a little bit over, and I look forward to the conversation and hearing from Rosalind as well. Thanks a lot.
Wow, thank you so much. It was very enlightening. Rosalind Hasselbeck is the founder, partner, and president of Catching H2O. Rosalind's vision is to change people's relationship with water, conserving it and using it with awareness in their homes and businesses. Rosalind is an American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association accredited professional, a Green Roof accredited professional, and accredited member of the G3 Gardens Group, and a Level 2 installer with Greywater Action. Rosalind's educational background includes a PhD in biology from the University of California, Irvine. Before embarking on her second career in water conservation, Rosalind taught biology at University of San Diego, where her teaching on environmental topics ultimately inspired her to form her first company, Building Green Futures, in 2007. She's a licensed landscape and general contractor, recently has begun a blog on nature-based carbon sequestration, and she'll post, I'm sure, the web link for that. And she also does bike rides to raise awareness about climate change with a nonprofit climate ride. Rosalind, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and I feel that everybody has kind of created a space for what I have to share, especially what Felicia was just saying. So you've heard a lot of background, you've heard a lot of detail on a bigger picture kind of level, and I'm going to talk about what you can do in your own backyard and what I think is super important as far as decentralized water conservation. So I'm going to just jump right in. I know we're kind of behind and I want to get to the Q&A. So let's see, here we go. Okay, so we think big at Catching H2O. So we're trying to do a lot of different things at once. And I believe very strongly that the solutions that we need right now with the crisis that we're in have to be holistic and integrated and not siloed. And so by using rainwater and greywater in your backyard, you can not only save on your water bill, and the goal is to at least use all water sourced on site for your outdoor water needs, so that you can hopefully limit the water that you're getting from outside water districts to just your indoor use. But then while you're doing that, you can also therefore have water on site that you can infiltrate, which is going to benefit your soil, which can then hold more water. You can then grow food, sequester carbon, help with urban heat island effect, just all sorts of different things. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I used to teach at USD, and that's when I first got interested in stormwater mitigation. I was doing some volunteer work in some of the open space canyons, and I realized that what happens in San Diego when it rains is that our storm drains are overwhelmed, and the open space canyons, to a certain extent, do help to infiltrate some of that water. This is in Mission Hills, and the water goes directly from the storm drain into this culvert into, I think it's Maple Canyon, but it's not enough. And so when we have a big rain event, we see that our beaches get closed, which is a big bummer for many reasons. And then the paradox is that we have water gushing and running down the street, and then people are using city water, imported water, for irrigation. It's completely mad. So this is just a very simple reminder that what we're really trying to do is to, in an urban setting, to recapitulate more natural hydrology, where we don't have this massive runoff, but instead, by creating as many pervious areas as we can, by creating more infiltration areas in yards, even planting roofs, planting park strips, and keeping rainwater on site, we can begin to create a scenario where we're trying to recreate that natural hydrology. And again, kind of a frustration for me there is that civil engineers, especially with new construction, will require that the runoff from new impervious structures be infiltrated on site. But typically they're designed in these, bioinfiltration pits, which are separated from the landscape, and then they use a ton of city water to irrigate the landscape. We have had some luck in being able to, on some projects, persuade the agencies to allow us to use rainwater catchment, demonstrating with flow charts and so forth that we are going to be actually infiltrating that on site in lieu of these basins. And this is just an old drawing I made a long time ago, just to make the point of, just with rainwater in many different ways, if you have planted roofs, which we're not doing much anymore, that's going to slow runoff. But you can also just grade your property so that runoff from the driveway goes into the landscape, but away from the house. Runoff from sidewalks goes into the yard. And so you can begin to be, even without storage, although storage helps, and I'll talk more about that, you can begin to be less reliant on external water for irrigation. So here's my ask. This is my big ask, and I'm going straight to the punchline. What happens if every household, let's just say San Diego County right now, collects rainwater and recycles gray water? So gray water is wash water, everything but toilets in the kitchen sink. Most families of 4 produce up to 1,000 gallons per week. That's a lot of water. Typical roof of 2,000 square feet in a year of 10 inches can harvest 12,000 gallons per year. Even in a drought year, that same roof is going to harvest at least 5,000 gallons. But if you get, a 10-inch year plus the gray water, that's up to 64,000 gallons per year. And with appropriate grading and mulching, that can be quite substantial in allowing individual households to, again, use on-site water for their irrigation. So it can work in many ways holistically, protect our watersheds by infiltrating stormwater and diverting sediment flows, build healthy soil with mulch and plants that can store more water, slowing climate change by reducing the urban heat island effect and sequestering carbon. So I want to talk about a couple of projects. I know I want to go through this pretty quickly and then talk more in the Q&A. This is an example project that we did in the Cholas Creek watershed. It was a grant-based project. We worked with 50 homes. So this is showing before and after, or during the process of this installation. And each of these homes, we put in rainwater storage of typically only 420 gallons, but that's still a lot better than a rain barrel. And then we also put in laundry gray water systems, and then also put in swales to capture runoff that wouldn't go into the tank, and then did regrading and mulching. And you can see after a year, a beautiful, lush landscape. Another example, and I apologize, this is kind of hard to see. Our company does everything from soup to nuts, so from permitting and design to installation and maintenance, as well as education. So this is an example of a project we permitted in University City, new construction. There's 2 2,500 gallon rainwater tanks that are buried. Would have liked to have gotten more, but that's as much room as we had. And then there's a whole house gray water system collecting from all of the showers, lavatory sinks, and bathtubs, which is then pumped out to irrigation. And so this household is pretty much reliant on the water that's on site for their irrigation needs. And here's where I want to make, I think, a really important point, which is with the droughts that we've been facing, I think the wrong message comes across. We don't want a zero-scape, and even a zero-scape isn't really the solution, because climate change means changes in rain events and water vapor and urban heat island effect, and we need to have plants on site for evapotranspiration and cooling, and to sequester carbon. It's not enough to reduce carbon emissions. We need to be drawing down carbon as well, and we can do that without relying on external water if we wisely use stormwater on site. And then just, to give you the math, 1,000 square foot roof allows you to capture 600 gallons of water with each inch of rain. And that's where the math came for the 12,000 gallons for a 2,000 square foot roof. And so we were always trying to tell people that this 55 gallon rain barrel isn't going to get you very far. replace it at least with a 500-gallon tank at one downspout. And if you can collect from the whole house, then we try to put in about 10,000 gallons worth of storage for a typical home. These are just components of rainwater harvesting for irrigation. I'm going to kind of slip through this quickly. Some different examples of tanks. This is actually in a large crawl space. We put quite a bit of storage underneath the house. This is in a garden where a vine is growing around these tanks, and many of our clients create wildlife habitat. So we're not only recreating more natural hydrology, but more natural ecosystems in urban areas. This is in a vegetable garden. And this is a project where the tanks that we could fit were fairly small, but they grew passion flower around them using the rainwater. Gray water whole house systems basically include, like I mentioned, shower and bath, lavatory sinks, not the kitchen sink, and laundry. And that can either go by gravity or into a sump and then be pumped out into the yard. And again, kind of going back to the ask, if people can just reduce their landscape irrigation even by 50%, we would need substantially less water imported to San Diego based on the 50% typical of outdoor. Treating water is a large-scale solution, but if instead we put in laundry systems, that's a lot less water to treat. And it's a debatable issue whether it makes sense to pipe all the water for treatment, but I would argue that there's a lot of loss, as Felicia was saying, with pipes leaking, and I think having water on site is definitely a benefit, and even if it's just the laundry water and not the whole house. And this is just an example of a small scale integrated solution kind of thing that we do, where the outdoor shower drains into a sump with a pump. There's rainwater collection, which can also drain into that same tank and be pumped out to fruit trees. And then the rainwater is also used for irrigation. And the last thing I want to just comment on is that none of our clients have to worry about power outages, meaning no water, because all of our water systems that we put in are in NSF grade potable rated tanks. They're UV protected. And so they can just use a backpacking filter, or even we sometimes put in drinking water stations with a simple carbon filter and UV so that they can have their own drinking water station on site. And I'm going to stop there so we can get to the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think we probably have many questions. I think Carl and I are going to alternate. And I'd like to begin with a question from Vince that came via email. Thank you for sending it. The gist of the question is that the Central Valley has much subsidence in it, especially as the groundwater is consumed and used. I know of one community there that has like 13 feet of subsidence. And yet the water from the Delta coming to San Diego goes through the Central Valley, mostly on a gravity-fed conveyance. What happens if what are the risks and what are the implications in planning to protect the aqueduct and the water conveyance? And I guess the same question would apply for the Colorado River. Is there a risk there of the same kind of problem? Where are we and what can we do?
I guess I can take that one simply. I mean, the Department of Water Resources absolutely surveying the California aqueduct to assess that and figure out if you can recover costs and all that. But that is definitely a big issue. It was also a driver behind the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, because the subsidence is even more than 13 feet in some places. If you saw that picture of a telephone pole I talked about, the guy was standing where the ground was in 1977, and you could see the top of the pole is where the ground had been in 1925. That pole's not there anymore, as you can imagine. So in some places it's sunk far more, and you have a loss of conveyance value, you have potential flooding. There's a bill right now to try and help pay for some repairs on a different system, on the Bryant system, and a very big fight over who should pay for it. Sometimes you have groundwater pumpers adjacent who have been sued, who have put some money into that. So this is going to be a pretty huge effort. And I know that DWR is looking at it. The Colorado River system is a little bit different. It's going over a lot of rocky soil. And actually at the bottom of it, in some ways, you have Imperial, which is the most senior water rights holder on the Colorado River. So they don't actually do a lot of pumping of groundwater because they have so much surface water they can use. It's possible that somewhere along the conveyance you have that, but in Southern California, you actually have a huge number of already adjudicated court-ordered basins that are actually managed very well. The State Groundwater Management Act was dealing largely with the unmanaged basins, largely in the Central Valley, largely in agricultural regions. So I haven't heard that being a big issue on the Colorado system. Doesn't mean it isn't. It just doesn't have the same sound and fury that we're seeing in the Central Valley, but there are a lot of eyes on that.
Next question I have for Dr. Boyd-Hodgson. Thinking about your ask for folks to run for the water board, have you been able to lean on others to get up to speed on how to serve on the water board or as a politician? I imagine some people think it's a job that folks just go in prepared for, but you actually learn as you go. Can you give us a little insight as how that's gone?
Sure. I think it probably varies by district. I will say that I wish there was a little bit more training and mentoring. I've served on a school board before, and it's, the structure is similar. There's a board of directors that govern, a head person. And the case of a school district, it's the superintendent. In the case of the water districts, it's the general manager. I think that it's a product of the culture of the district. I think it's a product of, kind of the organization and the management style of the staff and the management. But, what I've tried to do, and I'm hoping to continue to do, is, reach out to other folks that serve on water districts in San Diego County. And even, across the United States, there are a couple of actually women's groups. There aren't that many women on water district boards and in the water sector serving in political office. So that's a great opportunity for women to sort of support each other and reach out and mentor each other. And I'm definitely looking for that, because it is not an easy job. And it's a lot, I'm a neuroscientist by training. I'm not a water scientist. So, mounting that learning curve has been a bit challenging, but there are resources available. It's just a question of finding them. And there's always people willing to help. You just sort of have to find them too.
Thank you.
Thank you. AB 685 in 2012 passed in California, says that there's a human right to water in the state, and that means safe, affordable, clean, and accessible water. How is that implemented? If we're in communities of concern and people are unable to pay their water bill, what happens with respect to this human right to water? What does it really mean? What do we do with it?
I hate to say I should probably hop in on that, and I'll give you the short answer and then happy to elaborate on it. The human right to water, as a law itself, it was a policy statement, but those can have real teeth. And it told all of us that the policy of the state of California was to try and do that. What came out of it were a series of actions, all in different stages. Perhaps the most important one has been the provision of bond funding and now an actual subsidy to help small communities that can't even afford to operate systems, but also the ability for the state board to be able to consolidate small systems to where you can have an economy of scale, where you can actually have the managerial, technical, and financial capacity to run a modern water system in this era when we know about so many chemicals. It's not simple to treat water. Some places your water source is pretty clean, other places not so much. And there's just hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million people, particularly in the Central Valley and Salinas and ag areas, who are drinking nitrate contaminated, arsenic contaminated, Chrom-6 contaminated water. And there's no way we could give them all the capital grants in the world, they wouldn't be able to treat it. So it's a real direction that's made a big difference, including plumbing the city of East Porterville that many of you may have seen during the last drought, where you had over 1,000 households out of water. It's also led to a lot of work on the affordability question that the question raises, and the water boards issued reports and held hearings and worked with UCLA and others on studies to say, what would it take to subsidize water in urban areas as well, where people just can't afford their water bill. And all of that will require some sort of legislation to find a funding source. Fortunately, during COVID, people really realized the importance of water, and there are hundreds of millions of dollars that have come from the federal government and that have come in the state budget that one of the social service agencies and the water board will be issuing to get rid of at least the back fees, so that you don't end up with water districts going bankrupt and you don't end up with them having to shut off their consumers for failure to pay. I think this is the issue of our time. I didn't talk about human right to water, but I think it's probably the most important thing we can all be working on. But that one piece of legislation with absolutely no implementation has spawned a series of pieces of legislation that, taken together, hopefully will get us there. But you have to stay eternally vigilant on it, because it's easy to forget.
This is a question for Dr. Hall. Can you describe how changes in atmospheric currents, if they are changing or affecting your ability to properly model or predict what's going to happen with snowpack and the type of things that you were describing before about the shifts in whether or not we retain the water in the mountains?
Oh, I love a good science question. Yeah, so I mentioned the issue of uncertainty, and that the changes in the atmospheric circulation itself are a key uncertainty associated with a lot of the changes that I talked about. So we expect that atmospheric rivers, when they arrive, are going to contain a lot more water vapor, and that effect alone leads to an increase in precipitation. At the same time, there are potential changes in the atmospheric circulation and the oceanic circulation. A lot of the climate models, as the climate system evolves over the course of the 21st century, develop a quasi-permanent El Nino state in the Pacific, tropical Pacific, and that leads to changes in the circulation in the North Pacific, which affects California. And that changes the amount of precipitation that comes in and the character of precipitation. And there are other examples too of changes in the atmospheric circulation that are in climate models that we don't fully understand. We don't fully, we haven't fully vetted them, if you will, to try to understand how credible they are. And those are effects that lead to uncertainty in projections of changes in precipitation in California. But I think this water vapor effect, the increase in water vapor due to a warmer climate, is a very large effect, and it is one that we're very confident in. So that piece of it is at least well understood and well known.
Thank you.
Last week, the state published a report on 500 beaches in the state, and the #1 most contaminated beach in the state is at the mouth of the Tijuana River on our border with in California, but on our border with Mexico. Seems like its problem's been going on for decades, and not much success has been had. What can we do to really address this Tijuana River problem in a meaningful way?
Well, I don't want to take too much of the time, but I worked on that when I was at EPA, and we built the International Treatment Plant, which quickly got swamped, but it actually was worse. Then I think there's $300 million in the federal budget to help deal with that. I think we just need to negotiate with Mexico and do even bigger collection systems and better treatment models, because the way gravity works, it all comes downhill to us. I think also there are negotiated agreements that happen between the countries, and for whatever reason in the international arena, this is how I always felt when I was at Region 9 and I would go back to DC to argue for money along the border to deal with those problems, that there's a tendency in Washington to focus on Europe and focus elsewhere rather than our own border. I always thought that we got the money we did get because of NAFTA, and it was a way to mitigate whatever impacts might have happened with NAFTA. And a lot of good projects came out of it, but it's not nearly enough. I think the state of California and the all your federal representatives and all need to stay on it to make sure that you get the facilities you need to manage it, frankly. And a lot of it's going to have to be managed on this side of the border, but some of it through agreements with Mexico.
Dr. Haselbeck, question for you. One of the initiatives that I'm working on that's slightly unrelated is limiting gas usage and instead turning towards building electrification. But that threatens a lot of jobs here in the region. And so we're also looking for ways to help dull that impact on the trades because they're feeling very threatened. And the last thing we need is for folks to be feeling threatened and combating our initiatives to try to make fast change. And so one thing that's been offered is this idea of using on-site water treatment in larger buildings. And I think that's to create, if not potable water, at least reuse it in sinks and things that don't necessarily get drank. But I've also seen this done at the home level, in some places in Europe where they're actually trying to truly filter their water back to potable water. Can you give us a little insight as to how much you see that becoming a reality besides just using gray water back into our landscape?
Sure. I mean, I think, first of all, I try to match the water quality to the application. And so I do have one project where we did treat the first one in the county where we treated the gray water sufficiently that it can be used to flush the toilets. But that's a very expensive system because gray water is a lot harder to treat than rainwater. Treating rainwater to flush toilets is easy, and for bigger storage for residential projects, especially with new construction, we've occasionally used the rainwater for the cold water line on the wash or something like that, so that in the winter when they have lots of family visiting, they can take down the level in the rainwater tanks when more rain's coming anyway. So that's something. And we did a project over on Catalina Island at the visitor center there for the Conservancy, where the rainwater catchment is being used also for non-potable but again, rainwater, not gray water. So it's being used for mop sinks and other things like that, in addition to irrigation. So not for drinking, but for cleaning. But I think as far as jobs, I mean, I just hope that I keep waiting for the day when rainwater catchment will be on a bigger scale. And there is a grant program coming down the pike that my business partner's involved with, where we may be working with the county and putting in some larger systems where they're going to match some funds. So that's pretty exciting. That's all in unincorporated county. But I think at some point people are going to get it, that especially for larger properties, if we can put in significant water storage, it's going to make a big difference.
Thank you.
Can I just chip in there one thing, which is that if you look at all of the sustainability transformations that are required at the level of the individual homeowner, there's a lot there. There's renewable energy. There's the water issues that Rosalind talked about. There's energy retrofitting. There's the landscaping itself. A lot of these are high skilled jobs. They can't be outsourced. And I think we have to do a much better job arguing that the sustainability transition involves jobs, that it is a jobs program. And I think that's something that we should be very, very forward about. So I think there's a broader theme there, I think, to bring out.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, great for our schools to prepare people for those jobs too.
Mm-hmm.
Just to the eastern edge of our county is the Salton Sea, which I've seen some people say is the biggest water problem that we have in the state. What are your thoughts about the Salton Sea, and how do we fix it, especially given the state of the drought and the dust that's the toxic dust that's beginning to blow or is blowing?
I'll defer. This is one of those things of working on too many issues. It is a conundrum and a challenge. It's one where I think the solution is to keep moving on a smaller, stabilized sea fixing the dust, but also figuring out how to get those projects done to create wetlands and fix the soils, but get it to a stable level. Unfortunately, what happened now, probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, was in the transfer deal that San Diego was a part of, as part of what's called the Quantified Settlement Agreement on the Colorado River. The Imperial Irrigation District, again, the senior water rights agricultural community that grows probably 90% of the salad of the entire country during some parts of the year, sold it to San Diego in that transfer. But then for, I don't know, a certain number of years, San Diego, and they had to do mitigation flows where they fallowed certain fields to make sure that the sea wouldn't shrink further. That ended. And so now the sea is shrinking rather quickly. And so that is one of those issues where I think it's part of your watershed in essence, and where folks in San Diego should be pushing to get the remediation and other things that need to happen there, so that you don't end up creating not necessarily a dust bowl, but an incredibly hazardous situation for the people who live there, let alone the total loss of the bird and fish populations in the sea. But it's a longer story. It's a very complex arena. They're now studying some proposals either to desal water and send it, or pump water from not the Gulf of Mexico, but the Cienega down at the base. But it's going to be hugely, hugely expensive and challenging all its own. So it's the most wrenching public policy challenge, I think, in California, frankly.
Yeah, this next question is for Dr. Hall. Excuse me, because it's kind of lengthy, but this is from Cody, who has asked this question of other folks, but I think you may be a good target audience for this question. So how do you think that we should balance actions that impact global climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, versus actions that impact regional climate change? For example, integrated watershed management, reforestation, improving soil to increase water infiltration and reduce the severity of drought and heat waves. Given that climate action plans are mostly focused on greenhouse gases, despite the fact that these gases are globally distributed, and local reductions won't make significant differences to global climate change, how should we allocate scarce resources, time, energy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot, this question of whether we should emphasize adaptation to climate change or mitigation. I would say, first of all, that our best adaptation strategy is to mitigate, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we absolutely have to do that, because otherwise the adaptation challenge will be so much more enormous than it already is. So I think we have to do that. At the same time, I think the climate change adaptation challenge involves a collision with other sustainability issues. And I think the water challenge is a great one. I think without climate change, we would have a water sustainability challenge in California, because the resource is overallocated already, even without climate change. And in some cases, it's grossly overallocated. And that's without a change in climate. And then we have this climate change challenge, which is this huge stressor. And in most cases, it doesn't go in a direction that helps us. It makes things harder. And so we have a very messed up relationship with our natural resources, and climate change is just forcing us to confront that sooner. So I think that the climate change adaptation challenge is something that we have to confront for many, many reasons, including that it involves deeper sustainability questions. So I think the answer, unfortunately, is D, all the above. We have to do everything. We don't have a choice but to do everything. And I don't think that we can pick and choose. And by the way, I don't think that, I think that, again, this has to be seen as an opportunity and a way to do things better and grow the economy, make our lives better. I'm so jealous of these rainwater capture systems and gray water systems that Rosalind was talking about. I mean, I think those are so cool. I think we have to see this in a much more positive way, and not as a as something that is such a huge challenge that it's insurmountable.
The San Diego County Water Authority is doing research and writing reports and a plan to build a regional conveyance system, so-called, that will build an alternate path for Colorado River water to come to San Diego, not through the LA Water Authority. And presumably this conveyance system, whatever it is, whether it goes through the desert, over the mountains, or through the mountains, would do terrible things to the environment in our county. Do you think we should argue against or support or not support the idea of a regional conveyance system? How important is it?
I'll defer if anybody wants to comment on it. I think it's an incredibly expensive thing to do, and taking your water directly from the Colorado River without it being blended with the Delta water means you're bringing saltier water in. It's not as good a quality. There's a benefit to the blending. I think it's better to figure out how to use the conveyance that's already there and figure out how to reach agreement. That's just my off the top of the head. That's a lot of money that could be spent on retrofitting whole communities along Dr. Haselbeck's scenario. That's what in LA, we had the Corps of Engineers gave tree people $90 million in order to retrofit an entire watershed basin to show how much you could save in flood control rather than raising flood walls. I mean, I think there's a lot of things you could spend that money on other than that. But I know this is sort of the politics, cultural, declare independence thing that can be very important in a lot of communities, but I find it hard to understand the value of that project.
I don't know a lot about that project, but my general inclination is to not double down on big engineering solutions and to instead focus on the much more obvious, the much more obvious solutions, conservation, landscaping, especially native plant landscaping, because it has a habitat restoration function. The wastewater recycling, I think, is those are huge water sources that I think are obvious solutions. And then the other things that were mentioned in Rosalind's presentation, I think are excellent solutions too at the more property parcel scale. So I think those are the things those are the low hanging fruit. And I think, I'm inclined to invest resources there rather than another conveyance, another big project like that.
So that's actually a good segue into another question I have for Dr. Haselbeck, and that's that we heard earlier in the year from coastkeepers that it's a big problem dealing with stormwater in San Diego. And we do kind of a poor job at it despite people's best efforts in that department. And they're underfunded. And they're finally admitting it to everyone that, we are so severely underfunded that we don't really see any signs that we're going to be able to fully fund what we need to do. So how do we create a nexus between that gap in stormwater funding and then also this possible a change that we make to our individual homes and our landscapes through policy, so that we can say this is not a stormwater problem, this is just a harvesting opportunity? How do we do that locally? Who do we go to? Maybe do you have any suggestions about folks that are trying to make that connection happen?
I wish I did. My partner, Brooke Sarson, is more tied into that kind of policy stuff, but, and we actually work closely with coastkeepers. We do tours that volunteers can come on. They pay a small amount, but we do tours of different neighborhoods and show, you know, what different people have done for harvesting water on their sites and growing native plants and growing edibles. And Coastkeeper comes along and they talk about what they do, and it's a great collaboration. But I mean, I think that we need more people that are advocating for this, and we need more rebates. We have some, but a lot of them have been mismanaged. Like the city of San Diego had a rain barrel rebate, and in the process of that, they got all these rain barrels out there that weren't UV safe, and they didn't tell people how to use them, and rain barrels are too small anyway. And so it just kind of created this big mess. And so I think it goes back to what Tiffany was saying, that we need more elected officials that understand the importance of this, and we need more rebates, and we need more education, which we're working on in our own, you know, at our own pace. But yeah, the message needs to get out there, because as you saw from my presentation, if enough individual households save water on site, it makes a huge difference. So
can I just add a couple of things? You know, I think, you know, Vallecitos has a couple of rebate programs, but, you know, part of it is the education around that and the marketing and the messaging of that to increase people's awareness of it. But, you know, I would think at the county level, if there was some kind of wholesale effort to push out and to market around it, and if there were PR people that got on board with that and really provided the education so that people would know how to use and how to set up and, you know, bring you in and help connect everything. I think that that would be such a great opportunity, and it's a learning opportunity too for everybody involved.
Yeah.
I have a question. You know, I've read that in some other countries, your property taxes are based on how much water runs off your property, and so there's a structural incentive to infiltrate water on your property, and people do it because it's not just a rebate, it's not just a one-off thing, it's a cost that they have to incur every year if they don't infiltrate. And I'm wondering if anyone else has heard about this and if this is viable politically.
Philadelphia is doing it. I mean, there are places who are doing it in lieu of building giant treatment plants to deal with combined sewer overflows. DC Water does a bit, but Philadelphia is the example that most people use, where you get paid to keep it on site. It's interesting.
Interesting. Recently, Nestle got slapped by the state of California for stealing water and for many years and bottling it, selling it to us at exorbitant rates, contributing nastily to our plastic pollution problem. In addition, should we push the state to stop bottling water in plastic containers and try to address both the water and the plastic problem, and, you know, with some legislation?
Well, as with everything, it's more complex than that. If you're in a poor community that doesn't have safe drinking water, bottled water is your only option. If you're not somewhere, you know, there are times you need it. So it's not bottled water per se. It's the fact that we are doing so much of that when our tap water in most places is perfectly fine. And we've been marketed to in a way, you know, I always would get hate mail from the bottled water folks when I'd say we're regulating tap water more strictly than what's in a bottle of water. But I think there's a huge piece of consumer education there, where the folks who can afford, at least in some cases, are spending huge percentages of their income on bottled water. But in some cases, that's their only option. So it's not the bottle per se, it's the volume of it that's the problem. But the plastic issue and the issue of where it comes from is true with all kinds of economic uses. Gets to the question, if you were just focused on water and you had more of a Chinese model or other country model where you had a planned economy, you could say what people could make or sell based on their water right. But with us, it's just water rights. In the case of San Bernardino, the state board investigated and felt that the water right wasn't valid, but otherwise it's not different than any other commercial use. So I think there are plenty of problems with too much bottled water and the plastic, no question about it. But it's not as simple as blaming a bottle or blaming a nut even. It's not the nut that's the problem. The problem is you have too many almond trees planted over unsustainable groundwater basins, creating a political dimension because they're permanent with a lot of money involved that can fight to take it away from a fish. So but it's not the almond per se that's the problem. It's the volume and where it is.
Dr. Boyd-Hodgson, I know your tenure hasn't been that long on the water board yet, but can you give any examples of decisions that you've had to weigh in on, or maybe even ones that you've heard from other water districts where you felt like, this is why I'm here. This is even if you lost the vote, things that you think that we should know are being voted on at the, on these water boards so that people have a better sense for what kind of change they could try to make.
Sure. And I think that, again, I think it depends on the water district. My politics are different than the other folks on the water district. And so, I've tried to make change in my committee, and, that could be something like, adding a non-binary option to check off under gender when you apply, so that's one thing. That's water not specific, but that's something that I believed in. And so now our application includes, you can check yourself as non-binary when you are applying. But, we vote on a lot of infrastructure. And I also believe that when we pass a budget, we're saying that's how much stuff is going to cost. And so if an infrastructure issue comes up and it is outside of the scope of what we've talked about, then I do question it. And I want to know, well, have we explored other options? And I have voted no, because I didn't feel like we had explored all of the options. And I felt like maybe we, could have done a little bit more investigation or a little bit more research into finding a less expensive route to go. But I've also, we had the opportunity to give money back to the ratepayers. And, North County lost 24,000 jobs during COVID. And that's a lot of folks. And a lot of people are really suffering. We have over 1,800 people right now who are behind in their water payments. And come September, we're going to be able to turn off their water. I hope that comes up for a vote. I will vote no. I don't think we should be turning off people's water. I think water is a human right. But that would be one example, to be able to sort of vote my values within the sort of narrow parameters that I have. If I had folks on the board that that were sort of aligned with me on more visionary things, then I think we could do a lot of great things. We could join the U.S. Water Alliance, and we could have a focus on equity, and we can make sure that we are perhaps giving rebates for systems that Dr. Haselbeck sells, those kinds of things. But right, sometimes you just have to sort of play with the hand you're dealt. And if I can, make it more of an inclusive district, because I chair the policy and personnel committee, then, that's what I did. So hopefully more opportunities will come down the pike.
Thank you.
I think we could keep going a long time, but Meryl, what do you think? Are we wanting to bring Marion on?
How about 5 more minutes of questions? This is so engaging. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Okay. Well, one more here. I was surprised to learn that there are 1,500 or so reservoirs in the state, and 9 even in the city of San Diego. And I saw recently that someone, I guess the city, released a $10 million contract to an engineering group to review the state of repair or disrepair of the 9 reservoirs in the city of San Diego that were built, I think, between 61 and 109 years ago. And the expected result is they're going to come back and say we're going to have to spend north of $1 billion to repair or get back into good working order, or good repair the reservoirs. Is this a problem around the state? And are we paying attention to all the reservoirs in San Diego County that aren't just in the city?
Well, I can answer the state question a bit, not the San Diego one specifically, and perhaps Dr. Boyd-Hodgson can answer that question or somebody else. And the answer is yes, all over the state, that's a problem. Probably the premier one is Anderson Dam that the Santa Clara Valley Water District, now called Valley Water, runs, where they had worked for 10 years on a plan to try and rehabilitate it after the federal dam safety folks said that it was a risk. And finally, it took so long that they were given an order last year that they had to empty it because it was such a seismic risk. They've since emptied it. They're working on fixing it, some innovative work there. But that's why, if you look at the very first people to call for water conservation and the folks ringing the bell loudest right now, it is Santa Clara Valley Water District, because that's their largest reservoir. They have plans to raise another one, and they have a facility similar to San Diego that's recycling, and they have plans to do even more, and they're very aggressive on conservation, but they're tight right now. If this ends up being a 10-year drought, they're going to have a problem. So the investment in fixing it sooner rather than later is a smart investment.
Go ahead.
So mine is a little bit more microcosm-y because I only am familiar with Vallecitos, but a great deal of what we do is approving infrastructure for repairs or trying to be proactive to make sure that what we are doing is, trying to head off water main breaks. And I know that that's where a lot of our money goes. That's where we spend a lot of our money. And, as a new board member who's not an engineer, it is difficult to sometimes understand, well, what's nice to have and what is dire. You don't want to let things go until they're dire, because there could be another emergency and then you're really stuck. But that's something I think that comes with time, just sort of understanding what's nice to have and what can be put off another year. But that's where most of the money goes. Well, actually, most of the money goes towards like pass through buying the water, but the rest of it goes towards, repairs and trying to be proactive to keep the water from, leaking out and water main breaks.
I have a couple of quick questions. Dr. Haselbeck, can you describe why a kitchen sink is not considered gray water?
Grease is the main issue, grease and organic material. So it is actually, it's considered dark gray, and it can be permitted in Arizona and Hawaii. And we will occasionally, if we have a client that understands that it can't be permitted, we will occasionally put one in. If it's the perfect scenarios, if you have like an area like right outside your kitchen window where you could plant like just a simple lush little garden area, and you just do a super simple system. And if you have like a dual sink, then like you have one part of the sink that has the disposer and the dishwasher, and the other side where you're like rinsing things, that can go out to the garden. So we do it occasionally, but it's, we don't tell anybody.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that, because my head was spinning. Like, what's going down those kitchen sinks that people can't do that?
You have to wipe. If you have a system going outside, you want to wipe the grease out, and you can't use a garbage disposer. And but there's so much in the kitchen sink that is good, and so that's what's frustrating. People, especially if they eat a lot of vegetables and grow food, they're constantly like rinsing vegetables or whatever.
And so one more clarifying question. Someone asked, is toilet to tap still around? And can you clarify, does that have anything to do with pure water? I want folks to understand, are we still talking about toilet to tap? Did we rebrand it as pure water, or is that a different system?
Oh, you mean showers to flowers?
Pure water is toilet to tap, yes.
Yeah.
And I think what I was saying earlier is that everything that Dr. Tiffany Boyd, I'm sorry, I don't get the last part, but anyway, I lost that part. But what she's been saying about repairing leaks and so forth, I think arguably at least some gray water on site makes sense, because there's such a huge cost in moving that water back and forth and treating it and bringing it back again. But yes.
No, it's a mix. It is, but a lot has changed since that, because I was doing projects in LA, and after I left is when the toilet to tap hit, and it stalled everything in California for a good decade by by folks seeing what they call the yuck factor. But the fact of the matter is there's a whole new generation that believes in technology. The technology is better. And that's why we did these regulations at the state level, where we had that concentration of science and others, expert panels, stakeholder engagement, where we could set statewide standards that all of the water agencies think are too tough. But it's more important to be tougher than you need to be on something involving public health. It's a much smarter way to go. And I guarantee you, they won't be approving people doing these projects who haven't shown that they have the capacity to treat 24/7. Again, even with the sensors that can show you, the folks like San Diego, Santa Clara Valley Water District, and others who have invested the time to show they can do it and do the training, new operator certification rules, all of that. We're a light years ahead of where we were back when everything stalled. But you also have folks who think we're crazy to not have done more of it already, because treating water is not rocket science. It's the application of energy, know-how, and some money.
I think some people imagine that this water is carried through a sterile straw all the way, from the top of the state down into our taps, and that's not true either. It has to be treated, and so we're already expecting that that's happening.
To build on that conversation a little bit, we haven't said much about water quality tonight. And a few months ago, Erin Brockovich published a book in which she made one assertion, at least, was that every military base in the country has polluted water due to the chemicals and weapons and whatever that they deal with, which obviously includes us. Do we have adequate monitoring of water quality and public reporting of any issues that might arise, an alert system if needed?
Well, we have probably the toughest system in the country. Whether I'd say if it's enough is a whole nother question. But the water board issued rules. I think Michigan and California and I can't remember the other states, probably New Jersey, came out early on PFAS, which is the latest contaminant that I think Erin Brockovich has talked about, and others. That is key around military bases in quantity, but it's also ubiquitous through our Teflon pans and all that. So it's in all of our systems, but it's in quantities there. The same was true during the whole Superfund era, where I worked with DoD a lot, where you have a lot of solvents too used in cleaning aircraft. Anywhere you have an airport or you have an Air Force base or a naval base that has planes and things to be cleaned, a lot of vehicles, you had TCE and any number of solvents, and a lot of those are Superfund sites at the moment, all being cleaned up slower than you might like. But the water board issued testing notifications to water agencies about PFAS early. People again tend to complain about it because it's the first step before there's a regulation. But my view is you've just got to deal with the reality. A lot of times people try and stop you from doing things because it's inconvenient, but you've got to call it like it is. If it's there, it's there. If it has a health effect, it has a health effect. And I think most people would prefer that we take a more precautionary view. On the other hand, you do have to think about the expense of it. And we don't live in a pristine world or environment. We're sturdier actually than a lot of the critters in the environment. But that's the challenge of being in those jobs, is deciding where to draw the line. I mean, we had a reputation for being particularly tough on water quality, but we also were good at giving grant money to help people upgrade their facilities. So there's not enough enforcement staff, though, in the world at the federal and state level to be able to say that you have it buttoned down, because the staff just doesn't appear. And that's a problem at the local, state, and federal level. We don't spend enough on the people who can be out there doing the testing. That's why I'm excited about some of the real-time sensors and monitors that are going to give us a shot to have real-time view of all kinds of water quality issues. It's evolving, but it's evolving quickly. That will help us sleep at night, I think.
Speaking of drawing the line, bad cop here. Before I turn it over to Marion, who's going to close things out, I just want to make or ask one more question to Dr. Hall and make one comment. Dr. Hall, are you speaking to us tonight from high atop the Santa Monica Mountain watershed where you live?
I did a bunch of hiking over the holiday break and tried to get good Zoom backgrounds. That was my goal. So, but I like this background because it has an urban and a wildland component, which is, I think, represents California and the challenges in California.
It is very nicely representative. And I want to make one comment that over the course of our Zoom events for the last year or so, I've basically become adept at gauging the success of our events based on the attendee retention rate after 2 hours. And guess what, guys? You're winning. Beautiful job. I want to introduce the Secretary of the North County Climate Change Alliance, Marion CDO. Marion, are you there? And can you unmute yourself?
I was looking for the unmute button there for a second. Anyway, I want to thank all of our speakers and, of course, everybody who attended. And it really was a great panel discussion because each of you are experts in your own area, but such different perspectives. And we really, really enjoyed that. And we really appreciate the fact that you're willing to volunteer your time to come with this. So because of that, the North County Climate Change Alliance has bought each and every one of you a tree in your honor, which will be planted in a forest in California that has been affected by the wildfires. And you'll be able to go onto the website and look up and find your specific tree and see how it's doing and everything. And again, thank you so much.
That's a lovely gesture. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. An honor to be on this panel with these three doctors. My grandmother would now be chiding me for not being a doctor. I guess I have a JD, but that's not the same.
Well, the real doctors are the MDs, which we have one of those, I think, on the panel, maybe.
She would have settled for a PhD. She said, get a PhD. And I said, in what, Grandma? She said, anything you want. They can never take it away from me.
Anyway, thank you very much again. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks, for continuing to come, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is
Yeah.
really great.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.